Okay, so we're going to talk about a quick review of class versus functional components, the syntax for each and when each is useful. We'll talk about both states and props again and why each are appropriate. The focus is more so going to be on state today. We'll talk about events and data flow in your code. And then we'll talk about this really common pattern of method passing, where you take a method from one component, pass it down to a child component, which then calls it to update state inside of the parent. Any questions about this overview? All right. So another thing too that I want to practice during some of these lectures is Storybook is pretty cool, but I also want you all to know how to, work with regular React apps as well. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to practice that a little bit. So go ahead to your code directory, wherever you stash your stuff. Today is going to be a bit of a code along. And what do we want to make an app about today, guys?
Ross Perot.
I don't feel like I know enough about Ross Perot, but I appreciate the enthusiasm.
Oh, right. Tinder for rocks.
Tinder for rocks? Yeah, fuck it. Let's do Tinder for rocks.
Whoa, you broke him down.
I mean, this was meant to be one of my proteges were to do this, but I guess, sometimes you have to do it yourself. So in Tinder for rocks, one of the things we're going to get is we're going to get a list of rocks that are eligible for, is dating the word? What's it called when two rocks combine together?
Smashing.
Metamorphosizing, yeah. So when one rock finds another rock that wants to metamorphosize with, so we're going to give a list of different rocks, right? Also, I'm a new rock to this platform, and I want to be able to add myself into the listing of rocks available for metamorphosizing? Metamorphing. Collide.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel right, though. I feel like the terminology is key to this lecture.
It's more fun time.
Fusion. Ooh, I like it. I like it. So rocks to fuse with. Okay. So how do I start a React app, guys? I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Create React app, and then what do I want to put after that? Tinder for rocks.
Yes.
If you know any VCs, haul at them for me, because this is going to be big.
Say what?
If you know any venture capitalists, haul at them for me, because this is going to be big.
This is gonna be big.
All right. Now what? Now we CD into there. All right. Now I'm going to get init. I'm going to add the README packet, or actually I'm going to do an npm install first.
Why?
Oh wait, they already run that for me. I forgot how fancy they are. I won't do that. I'm going to add package.json, the source, the yarn.lock, which is similar to a package.lock. Yarn.lock is just one that's generated by Yarn instead, as well as my public folder and the README. Not going to check in node modules.
Are you recording this by chance?
I am recording this. Git commit m initial commit. Great. Y'all are coming into project week, so I'm going to pretend I'm treating this a bit more like an actual project. So I'm going to make a feature branch. Git checkout b rock listing. Right? This is my feature branch where I'm going to start listing out rocks and scaffolding things. All right, so going into the source folder, I have all of this. I'm going to make a new directory called components. Okay. Then inside of components, I'm going to start off with a rock list component. And I'm also going to make a rock component because I'm going to generate rocks inside of my rock list. So the way that I think about class versus functional components is if I have a component that is only displaying data, then it's going to be a functional component, right? If it's just displaying data, it doesn't have any lifecycle methods, it doesn't have any state, that's what's appropriate. Whereas if I do have things I need to keep track of, or I do have lifecycle methods I need, a class component is more appropriate. So given that we're going to have a rock list component that's going to render out a bunch of individual rocks, which one do you think should be a class component, and which one do you think should be a functional component? Yeah, rock list should be class, and why?
You're going to be eating a bunch of rocks and, well, using a bunch of rocks.
Yeah, it's going to maintain the state of all of our rocks are. Now, depending on the way this app is laid out, that might be functional as well. I might be storing that rock state at a higher level component up. For this app, at least, I'm just going to go ahead and put the state in the rock list component. So for us, yep, that should be a class one. And then how about rock? Is there any reason to make that a class component if it's rendering out just the details of a rock? Nah, that's just fine. And at a higher level, there are kind of two different ways you can approach React design. You remember when Scott talked about component-based design yesterday and how like we have bigger components that are composed of smaller components? You can work either from the outside in or the inside out. Sometimes it makes sense to say, all right, here's an internal most component. I'm going to develop out from there. Sometimes you're going to start with a bigger component and then drill down from there. I think both are appropriate approaches. But which approach I recommend specifically depends on how much of a understanding and notion of what you're doing you have. Like if you have a pretty clear path forward, I like to go inside out. I basically know what this is going to look like, so I'm going to go with the smaller component, work my way outward. But if I wasn't really sure what I was doing yet, I would start with an outer, too big component, and then break down into smaller components after the fact. And I'll regularly switch between both methodologies during my projects because they can each be useful at different times. Yes?
Can you PWD?
What?
Can you PWD?
Can I PWD?
Yeah.
Oh, can I input the command present word? Yes. I thought that was a verb. Like, how does one PWD? Sure. I think I shared this story before, but it's applicable right now, so I want to bring it up again if I haven't. They did a really interesting study on first year and second year computer science students, and they investigated the students' approach to writing code. The two broad approaches to code were either planning based, so you really think about your design first, right? You really plan things out. You get a little bit more inside out component based, like, okay, I'm gonna do exactly this, then do exactly that, like a real heavy plan based approach. That was one way. And then another approach was I'm just gonna dive in and start coding stuff and then add structure and reason to it afterwards. Between group A of students and group B of students, who do you personally feel would be more successful?
Group A.
More successful as in.
Right?
Who gets shit done?
Who gets the better grade in the class? Who writes better code?
I think it depends on the size of the project.
A.
So, none of the above. The best are the people who are flexible and can do both approaches. Which I guess scope of the projects is kind of part of that, right? So if this is a small weekend hack project and I don't really understand the technologies I'm using, there's no point in trying to do best design right from the get-go. Like I should just write some stuff and then later on impose order events. Right, but by and large, the best way to do things is you want to plan, but you don't want to plan so much that you're crippled by it. Sometimes if you really just aren't sure what you're doing enough to even make a plan, what I like to do is go on a Git branch, just write garbage code to figure out what I'm doing, right? It's exploratory code, and then I'll delete that branch, right? I have no intent on even using that code necessarily. If there's some bits I liked, maybe I'll bring them in, but by and large, I'll probably throw out that branch or completely rewrite, refactor that code. But it wasn't pointless. Me jumping in and throwing some code at the wall motivated the end design for it. Right. I call it sacrificial architecture.
So that's your sort of your MO normally, just start coding and throw it out?
So for me, it depends on how well I understand the problem. If it's something, like if I had to write an Express CRUD API, I would probably architect that the right way from the start because I've done that like 50 times. If I was starting, if I was trying to write a game in Unity C#, I've never written a game in Unity C# in my life. I have no idea how to implement all the best practices for that. I would just start writing code to figure things out. And then after I figured some things out, I would take the hindsight and then reapply it. Right? You know how hindsight is 20/20 in real life, but you can't go back in time? Well, with code, hindsight is 20/20 and you can't go back in time. Right? So it can be favorable to push forward and then get that hindsight. So really both approaches are powerful and have their place, and I think the best approach is to be flexible and try each out. As a rule of thumb, the less experienced you are with the particular tools and languages you're using, the more I would encourage a jump right in approach, which sounds kind of backwards, right? The less you know, the more you should just like haphazard it. But it's true, because that's how you figure things out. Then as you get more experience with it, you can do a little bit more delicate planning. But by and large, no, if you just haphazard jump into something, you're probably going to have to rewrite and throw most of that code out, but that's okay. It's worth it as a learning process. Exactly. That's another thing too, is I think at this point you're all starting to realize that code is a very ephemeral thing. Right? Has everyone seen those things where you have like the sand and then you draw like the designs in it and afterwards you clear it all out? Code's kind of a lot like that. Right? You can't get too attached to it. Right?
You're saying it's better, easier to start from scratch once you have some ideas?
If you write a huge piece of code, like we're talking like thousands of lines, like games, and you have no idea what you're doing from the start, you finish writing it, not like perfect, but it works. A lot of the times it'll be easier to scrap the whole thing and recreate it from the beginning, knowing what you're doing properly, than it will be to try to fix all the little holes that are.
Yeah. One caveat to that is if this isn't complete rewrites of old projects are generally a bad idea because there's a lot of experience in that and lessons in that code that you don't want to lose.
Yeah, you're not going to delete it. You're just going to be like copying and pasting bits.
Yeah, so it's aggressively refactor. Like, rewrite this chunk of the app while keeping the rest of it going. That's what I like to do, right? A year from now, it's going to, basically be a complete rewrite, but throwing all the code and starting from scratch almost never goes well, right? Just progressive enhancements and just, rewrite subsystems.
It's important to me because I have projects that I need to rewrite.
Yep, so figure out the messiest part and rewrite that first, is how I approach it. Okay, so now that we said all that, let's write out our route component. I know what I'm doing with React a little bit, so I'm doing the planning inside-out design, going from the component. So let's say let rock equals that. This is in components. Here, I'll bring over my directory tree so you can see it. Why Why aren't she working? Oh, there we go. So this is my structure right now. I have a component structure with a rock and a rock list component in it, and I'm inside the rock file. Is everyone getting why with these ES6 functional components we're using these parentheses here instead of the curlies?
That's the end of one line. Make it an implicit return.
Yeah, because if we were to use curly braces, we would have to use a return and then still do the parentheses, right? And the reason I like to point this out is because when people first learn ES6 arrow functions, what is kind of a easy misunderstanding to follow is, oh, you can omit the return if it's one line. That's not true. What it is you can omit the return if it's one statement. That statement can go over multiple lines. And for example, let's say we have something that looks like this. So let's say we have some text like that, some paragraphs going on about this rock on its blog profile, right? The way that this actually looks, if we were to convert it from JSX to what the JSX compiles to, is going to help us understand this picture. So rewritten without JSX, oops, I also got to do. This also explains why you always have to import Reacts, even if you're not using the React keyword. Roughly, react.create element div right? It compiles down to that basically. Because the three parts of making any HTML element are what? First, we have the type of the element. It's a div. Then we have attributes. None of these have any attributes, but if we would have done some, that would get put into the second parameter. Then the third thing any HTML element can have is content, which can either be text content or it could be an array of children nodes. In the event of the div, we have an array of children. In the event of our p tags, we just have simple text as the contents. So this compiles down to this. But see how for all of these we're calling this method react dot. The Babel toolchain is going to convert this to this, and without React being included, it's not going to know what that refers to. So that's the meaning of having that up there. The other important part about this is notice how this whole thing, it'd be kind of gross, but I could one-line this. right? Because this is all one statement right here. We're really creating one top level element, right? Everything a part of that is just internal to that component, right? So we're really only doing one statement up here. We're creating this outer div component, and everything else inside of that is a part of that one statement, right? It's like a deeply nested math equation. This is why, with the arrows up here, you can omit return and the curlies, because this really is just one statement.
Wait, so on line 11 and 13, that's supposed to be curly?
On lines 11, no, neither of these are meant to have curlies. This is one statement, and this is one statement. This is the JavaScript code that the JSX compiles to, which you don't need to memorize this form. There's almost no occasion to write your React like this, other than to understand what's going on behind the hood. And this makes a lot of things make sense, such as, why can't I return 2 elements? Well, because you can't return 2 React.createElement statements. That doesn't make any sense. How come I can use parentheses to go over multiple lines? Because you're actually doing it in one statement. That's why I'm showing you this, because some of the weird, kind of esoteric looking JavaScript we've been writing, this is the thing that allows it to work. Any questions? All right. With that being said, what sort of information do you think we're actually going to need in our rock? What sort of information are we going to say about our rock?
Name,
Name,
type,
type,
age.
age. What else?
Maybe color.
Color. Ooh.
Location.
Yeah, where it was found.
I feel like we need some sort of rock-specific word here to really bring this home.
Well,
Clarity? Cut? No, that's diamonds
it's
and
not,
gems.
it's
What about like the APS 7 trait memorphic?
That'd be like type, I guess.
hardness.
Hardness, yeah, there we go.
Is there a word for that?
I think it's just called hardness. All right. There we go. So this, and see how through specifying my properties up there, this is how I'm kind of orienting my design. I'm saying, all right, what are all the things I really need to display about a rock? Right? About a user in our site. Yes?
Of course, I think we need another squiggle. I love hardness.
I do need another squiggly. Okay. So then what I want to do after that is I want to render out all that information. I probably want to, in a real app, do this a little bit more style and finesse. But at the end of the day, we're trying to get the data on the page, so let's do that first. Great, and voila, we have our beautiful and amazing rock component. And if we want to try that out, you can either A, load that up in a storybook with a story. Alternatively, what you could do is you could go to this app.js component, the default one that's included. Go ahead and comment out the old app. Create a new app component. Render. Import rock from component/rock. Now let's render out a div. I almost always do that with React, by the way, is just throw a top level div so I don't fall into the adjacent sibling problem. And then I'm going to render my rock right here. Okay, I'll bring this back up for people to copy along, but first I just want to run things and make sure they work. In general, I don't really like writing more than 10 lines of code without checking it. I'm breaking my own rule right now. Then the way we do it through the standard tool chain is just npm start or yarn start. Oh, I do have an issue. Man, these errors are good. I love how good these errors are. So let's see, let's go to line 10. You don't actually want that in there. Cool, that seems to be working. But one thing that we're missing here is that we didn't actually apply any information into this rock. So, what type of rock do we want? What's its name? What is its type? I'm not trying to spell igneous, so I'm reluctant to do that one. Yeah, I think that's it. Close enough. How old is stoner igneous?
4 million years.
That's a lot of zeros, so
You just put 4 mil.
420 years old, right?
oh yeah, it's 420 years old. Okay. All right. What is the color of this rock? You guys are taking this metaphor hard. All right. How hard is
Really? Rock solid.
rock solid? Oh, rock solid. I like it. All right. So there we have our rock. And I could have gone down here and said, you know, each one is individual, name equals blah, blah, blah. But I think this is a little bit simpler. So I'm going to say that will pass down all those properties. I think I did it right. Let me double check. No, that works.
You have that about rock wrap.
No, it works. You can see everything. So what this, in case I lost anyone with this is something you'll see a lot in React, where I could have passed down all these properties individually. Right, I could have said name is equal to rock.name, type is equal to rock.type, so on and so forth. But object spread is just going to take all those name value pairs and destructure them inside of there. So this is a nice shorthand that you'll see pass up a lot. Because when you're only passing 1 or 2 props into a component, it's not a big deal. But once you start having a lot of them, it's way faster just to object destructure to pass them down. Okay, so when you run this and I start up npm start, you should see something that looks like this, right? Just a straight listing of all the different rock properties. Okay, so what I want you to do now, I'll leave both of these up, is I want you to be in a place where your app component is just rendering one rock, or if you would like, you can choose a different theme. Kittens isn't also a fun one. You can do users if you're feeling uninspired, and get this rendering out. Then after this, we're going to have a list of them rendered out, and then finally we're going to get the capability to add new ones through state changes. Any questions so far? All right, give you 3 minutes. Yeah, I want you to emulate what I just did.
Render something.
Or you can choose your own, like let's say you want to do like bakery goods.
Yeah.
Right, so make a baked good component, an app component, and then you're later on making a baked good list components.
Sorry. I can't look straight.
You what?
I can't look straight.
Oh, you're not. Oh, it's okay. Do you have a chiropractor for that? They do wonders, I hear. Well, let me know if you need to. Let me know if you need to. If you need help with it. Sorry, man.
Where did you put all the lit rocket all that stuff?
The way that I put that was I just made a simple variable, similar to like you do in your storybook.
Oh, it's above that.
Yeah.
Okay. Outside. Yeah.
It's not the idiomatic way to do it, but it's a simpler way to do it.
What's the name? SRC import components rock falls outside SRC.
Did they seem to be fairly solid with it?
Yeah.
Usually people get a longer review with it.
I mean, the thing is, you don't have to. It's same as.
Yes.
Supposed to be an SRC.
Oh, here's the problem. You have something actually not right here. It's same directory, not directory off. All right, everyone. So now let's take a rock list and render that out instead, and create that and prepare to render it out instead. Then we'll get to our new point of adding additional ones. This is all kind of a review, so I'm going over it pretty quickly. So going into source, components, I'm gonna open up rock lists. All right, so is this one going to be a stateful component? Mm-hmm. And there's some variability here. Some people would argue in certain cases it would make sense to even store this one level higher, but this is an okay place to store the state. Okay, so I'm going to make a render method. And I'm going to say this starts off with an empty list of rocks. Something that I like to do, though, by the way, is...
Do you have to initialize it?
I did. You don't need to use the constructor if you're not changing anything.
Okay.
So one thing that I like to do personally is one of the most powerful things about having React be a single-page app, completely different from server app, is let's say that you are working on the rock rendering view, but your lazy backend team still hasn't finished the APIs for you to get these rocks. A great way to mock that out is to just give yourself some component state with what would come from that API and develop with that. And then later on, after the API is ready, swap the state out to being empty like this, and then pull it in from the API. Okay, so let's grab some rocks. I'm going to grab the one from up here.
So are all classes going to extend?
Yep, at least in React. Okay, so that's that. Let's give us one more rock to work with. All right, class, I need your creativity. What's the name of this rock? Limey the coal. That's limestone. All right, Limey the limestone. Type metamorphic. How old is he?
Wait, what's the? Which is the one that's kind of one?
You know this.
I thought.
Age?
20.
20. All right. Color? Pick green, obviously.
It's yellow. Jordan
Is it?
right. We need to change it.
Fine. Okay, and hardness?
Soft.
Soft. All right. So we got our rocks. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make, oh, we already have down here our render method. And review of yesterday, what are we going to want to have happen inside of this render method? We need to import rock, right? And something that I like to do is before I get into the return, I like to set up my data here if it's something a little bit fancier. You can go ahead and do it in line. I only like to do that for really simple things though. So I'll say let rock elements equals this dot state dot rocks dot map. And what am I mapping? I'm mapping each rock into what? I'm going from a rock object, right? A rock JavaScript object to what, everyone?
JSX component.
Yeah, a rock components. Where I will then take all the information about rock and just elegantly destructure that into it, like so.
Do you programs for that or no?
No, because I'm not inside, I'm not writing any JSX right now. Actually, no, I think I do need JSX for that. I think so I did it before. Yeah, I do need. Because at this point, I am inside of a JSX element. It can be a little bit confusing because you can kind of fluidly go in and out of whether you have to expressionize it or not. I think that's one of the harder parts. And there's one other thing I'm missing here. What's that?
A key.
Yep, key.
You always need that?
You always should have that. At the end of class today, I'll share some information about why that key thing is necessary, but it's somewhat tangential, not super important. So say count equals 1. Typically, I would make the key based on the ID from a database. These don't have that, so I'm just simply going to say key equals. I like that too. Good thinking. Yes.
It's this dot rocks. It's not this dot state dot rocks because we need to find the variable up there.
I'm not using that one. I'm using the one passed in from. Oh yeah, sorry. This dot. No, it's this dot state dot rocks.
No, I got an error.
Yeah, you're not setting the state.
Oh, I screwed up then. I really need to do
State equals.
state. Yes. Good call. So this part down line 23 was right, but up here is where I went wrong.
State equals box.
Yeah, it should be state equals curly brace rocks. Thank you. There we go. That should work. State is an object with a rocks property map. And then after all that, we're just going to say like so. It's my favorite React error. Yeah, literally, I recommend getting in the habit of just always writing like div every time you do a render for that reason. Okay. So let me make sure that's running okay. No issues there, but something I do need to change is now I need to go back up into my app component. And instead of rendering rock, inside my top level app component, I'm going to render rock list, which will then render the rocks on my behalf. I don't need this anymore either. Welcome to Tinder for rocks. Let's render out rock list. When did I close? Unexpected token, line 37. You have no idea how spoiled you are going to be by these error messages. They're fantastic. And then also export default rock list. Okay, try again. There we go. And if done correctly, you should see now you get something like this, where we have a list of rocks rendered out. Yeah, I'll get the code back up too. There you go. Give you about 3 minutes to catch up to that.
Where's the ending of parentheses for the dot math?
The ending parenthesis.
For the dot math, right before your parameters rocket time. Oh, it's right there.
Yeah, it's right at the end. Yep, should actually list out the rocks. Yeah, you have to actually put here, I'll show you. So you're missing
Oh yeah.
this part right here. One additional thing I'd like to point out is that everything in these expressions, because right now they can seem a little bit vague, I'd imagine, as to what exactly you can or cannot put in them. You must put something that is a React element inside of there, or you can put something that is an array of React elements, right? Rock elements is an array of rock elements, right? React is smart enough to say, oh, if you pass me an array full of components, I know to just render each one sequentially. Question?
So I did see this character I expected to see something before. Specifically, what I expected to see is summary events there. So you have like this there and you match right there.
Super close up.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. Oh.
We got two of them. Problems.
Yes.
Can you not do? You know how with calling classes you can do an export default class. It seems like export works on like arrow functions. It exports cold for some reason.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird syntactical gotchas. Another nail in the coffin of why I really don't like import export, which require just stage. Like literally, in my personal code bases that I'm not working with anyone else on, I just use require. It's not trendy though.
If we're really trendy, maybe learning Vue right now.
I have no interest in Vue. I'm sure it's great, but React is my first one. I'm like, this is good enough for me. I like React. I'm sure it's great though.
Sure.
I think Alibaba is big on Vue. Is that the one? Because there are a couple big companies that are using it. All right. So next up, we have a lot of props, and here's kind of the methodology behind React. And I like to make this kind of weird emotional metaphor because it makes it stick better. So the React paradigm is, you know how right now we're rendering a list of rocks? Let's say that we were to change this list in some way, or modify this list one day. So like on the DOM, it's like we have a rock list. I don't like this color. Haven't got a good black marker around? Thank you. I think of it like this. We have a rock list component. And from that rock list component, we're generating two rock components. The props for these guys, right? Props are passed down. Will exist as states inside of here. The general framework is we have some sort of parent that maintains states, and then it passes those down to its children as props, right? State at some high-level component, and then props that propagate down throughout. Props are immutable. State is changeable. So if props are immutable, what that means is that these rocks are stuck, right? This rock element and this rock element, that's all they are ever going to be. They have no hope to be anything else in their life ever. It is a very sad, dire situation. So what's this inconsiderate rockless parent component does when it's unsatisfied with its children, right? It needs them to change. It simply deletes its children, right? It just ships them off to
Siberia.
To the memory graveyard. It's worse than that. And we'll render an entirely new list of children. And this is conceptually quite accurate. That you can think of whenever there's any sort of state change here, that component's going to throw out all of its children and render a whole new list of them every time. Conceptually, a React app is more similar to a game UI than it is to a web UI. And what I mean by that is when we do web programming, we think about we have this DOM, we think about we have this tree, right? If we want the website to look different, it's a matter of we tweak this node or we add this node, right? It's a very immutable sort of thing. The way React conceptually works is if you were to go to the very top component and just re-render from the top and re-render it over and over and over again, that's conceptually what's happening, right? And that's like how, for example, a video game or any sort of high graphical intensity system works, right? If you're playing some sort of like shooter game and you see like all the people here and you're like right here, and someone moves from there to there, it doesn't mutate some sort of DOM state for that. It will actually redraw the entire screen for every single change. Now, those are running on very high performance optimized systems, so they can afford to do the wasteful thing of just redrawing the screen over and over and over again. The DOM is a little bit slow, and we can't do that in practice, but conceptually, we can think of it as if we're doing this render cycle over and over and over again. But We're not going to go too deep into how that's not actually the case because the finer details of that aren't generally important for writing the applications. But I think a little bit of it is worth knowing about. So let's talk about how it's not quite that inefficient. For one, rock list is just one component, right? Let's say that our app is up here. Rock list is here and some other components are over here. Whenever set state is called, you could think of it as that component downward is rendered, right? So if we call the set state right here, the actuality of what happened, even though you could just think of an entire refresh as giving you the same thing, from a performance standpoint, it's a bit better. Because really, we're just refreshing from this node downward. This other half of the DOM tree is completely unaffected. It will not be re-rendered. It gets a little bit better than that even. Remember how I said we had to do keys for these guys? Without keys, what's going to happen is it's going to have to iterate over these one by one and see what ones it can keep or what ones it can't. What is the big O of iterating over a list? N, right? If there are no keys here, it has no choice but to do an order of N updates. Now, if you supply keys to each one of these, it can be like an object and do direct access for what needs to change. And what is the big O of that? Constant, right? So you will get a significant performance boost for larger apps by supplying that key metaphor. Because what that does is React's algorithm with the virtual DOM, depending on when it should do things, is directly affected by those keys. There's a good article on the React site if you are interested in more details about that. You don't really need to know it to program with it, but it's interesting. And then in that video I sent you all, there's a section near the end where I talk about this at a fair amount of depth. But end of today, what I want you to understand is that conceptually, you could just think of this as re-rendering from the top over and over and over again. That's the simplest way to think about it. But due to some React trickery, it's far more performant than that in practice. Any questions? Sweet. All right, so let's start adding some state changes. Now we have state, we have props. Let's make state changes. Where I'll do one cheesy example just to set the stage, and then we'll do a real one where we add rocks. This one I'm going to kind of emulate an Angular style two-way binding. Where we'll have an important message up top. And where that comes from is up here in my initial state I set up. I'm also going to make an, I'm going to call that one message. What do we want our default message to be? My class is no fun and uncreative today. All right. So we have some sort of message there that every time this component runs, it's going to get that. But you all probably don't like this message, right? You don't want to be no fun and uncreative. You want to change that. So I'm going to give you the power to do so through an input. Input has something called onChange, where every time this is called, that method, every time it changes, this method's going to be invoked. And there's a couple different ways we can set this up. One of them is we can use an anonymous function. So we can do something like this. where every time React tries to emulate the native event system for the DOM. So a lot of the stuff that you would see back in your DOM manipulation stuff is going to pop up here, right? Where we have this idea of whenever events happen, this function gets called with an event property. And then on that event, we can do target.value to read things off of it. And additionally, I'm going to set the default value of this to actually, let me run it like this real quick.
You need a,
You have to close it.
but yeah, you have to close the input.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There we go. And what we see we'll get is, drag this over, something that looks like this. Where up top inertia says, my class is no fun and uncreative today, to now they are all inspired, happy, and joyous. Isn't that lovely? Okay. So try getting that one working first. I'll bring back the code for it. And iterating again how this actually happened is see how I have this .state.message being rendered right here. Every time there's a change on this input, this anonymous function is fired, right? Where it's going to take the event, e.target.value, that's just like the vanilla DOM input, right? That's going to correspond to whatever I typed in. And what happens is every time you call setState, this component is re-rendered, right? In truth, there's some diffing that occurs to make that a rather efficient process. It'll only update what's necessary. And the other part to take note is see how in setState I changed the message, but I only set state to message that. What about all those rocks that I did? Well, really, setState works as a merge. Whatever state you have before that is not messaged explicitly there will be left alone. So rocks and everything under it will be left alone, but message will be overwritten as that's what I put in right here. If I put rocks in there, rocks will be changed as well. Any questions on this? All right, go ahead and try it for yourself. 3 minutes, and then we'll actually, we're over an hour, so we'll take a 5-minute break after that.
How come some people's screens load the center and some on the side?
Because I left class name equals app, which takes default setting.
Oh, so yeah, I deleted the app component on mine. That's why.
What that is?
Yeah, here, I'll show you. So if you take a look at mine, because mine's loading to the side, Daniel, but if you look at the default app component, see how I just said app extends component? This is the default one. If you just write your shit inside of here, this div class name app is what's giving you the centering.
Oh, I see, yeah. I like the center.
Can you leave that rock out for a minute?
The rock list or the rock?
The rock.
Sure.
going too fast, yell at me to slow down. I will not take that offensive play.
So you can yell, you can go faster. Or you
Scott, we need to fuse, then we'll have the perfect lectures. They do it just the right pace.
Actually, maybe that's a lecture you do on the study. See ways that I can like. See ways that I can like. See where you can take it for you take up some more time, so I can take up some more time. I'm not sure you should take up all that. Like, you know, like we have different. They're not in-person problems, right?
I suppose, yeah.
Unfortunately. That'd be convenient though. It was as simple as swapping each other out every 10 minutes. Like instructor swap, and it's just that it's like.
Yeah, we're running a little fast, but Scott, you take over for 3 minutes to slow this down.
That'd be hilarious if it worked that way. But is that it? You have to be all engineers who just keep more headcount. Exactly. You know, 1 unit to work.
Yeah,
Horsepower.
yeah. This is gonna take 1 engineer 5 days, and 2 engineers on. You should be able to put your heads together within 2 days. Come on.
This is where I think about it. We're here in the shopping cart and we're trying to put like all these pieces together. So in the cart, this is what is happening. So this is done already. Go over here. And then I'll be right here. And here is works. There's a word called shopping cart.
So, what you can do, instead of return, you can do a cost log. Cost log, alright. That way you can kind of make let's go back to here. Let me see it then. Okay, so let's go back to this. This same component both places, right? So not this kind of thing. Where we can test it is when you destruct that, you lose a little bit of insight. When you spelled the destruction part wrong, if you didn't do destructor, you would just say promise. So we will now even if what's past you'd still see it. So instead of doing that, let's try
No, I can't structure it. It's sort of a channel, like, what? Oh, it is yeah. So it's a YouTube channel for gaming kid and have like maybe a dude who's like really, really smart. It's like one of those like roll around ball things, like masterminds. I don't know what the name is specifically. It's fun. They make great videos, like 100%. They have an entire mini series about Legend of Zelda dungeons and like what goes in. Alright. Let's hop back in.
Still talking about events and data flow, by the way. Question: how's pacing feeling for y'all? Is feeling about right? Too fast? Too slow? Good? I like it if you like it. So personally, this is okay, but I don't feel great about it. It makes me feel a little bit like hurt and disappointed on the inside. So to make it better, And actually, let me articulate that a lot, because I really don't like when people say this is bad practice because I said so. Here's why I think this kind of sucks. While terse, it is not immediately obvious to me what this anonymous function does. Right? I really think comments tend to be a band-aid around code that doesn't have enough functions in it, right? A good function name is better than any comment is ever going to be, in my opinion at least. So I'm going to pull this out into a method, and I'm going to intentionally do it wrong for those of you at home, where I will say, let's make a method called update message. And inside of update message, I'm going to say this dot set state message goes to e.target.value. I'm going to get rid of this nonsense. Replace it with new nonsense. Okay, let's run that. I'll bring it back. So what I did was I got rid of the anonymous function here, and instead I pointed it at this .update message, and then I have a named method update message that does the same thing, this .set state within the passive event value. What? Nope. There is an intentional bug here, though, where now my stuff's not working. Uh-oh. Why is it not working? Cannot read property set state of undefined. And this right here is one of the worst errors in React if you accidentally get into it, because it is not, well, if you go over to my console, see how mine says type error, cannot read this of undefined. I know what that means, but as a beginner, you're likely to get very lost at the what the hell is going on here. Can anyone tell me what was going on there? What is the problem with this code that looks correct? Yes.
Update message is not bound to that instance.
Yep, we do not have binding here, right? When we plucked off this update message and set it as a callback for onChange, there is no binding between that function and its data anymore, right? And there's a couple of different ways to fix this. One way is we could just go down here and we can say .bind this. That'll do it. Things are working again. Why does this fix kind of suck, though? So, do you all know that it's good for you to take a daily vitamin? Most people would say that, right? How many of you take a daily vitamin? Well, I'm impressed. That's not bad. But most of you don't. And even those of you who do, you probably forget now and then. As such, leaving it to remind, if you have to remember to do this every time, you're probably not going to do it. You're probably going to forget to do it at some point, and it's going to come back and bite you, right? Just like we obviously all know, like, yeah, we should take a vitamin every day. That's healthy. It makes sense. Despite being so simple, it tends to not be done, though. So something that's a little bit better than this is to immediately in your constructor go forth and bind all those. You can see that trick, but it's messy too. But long story short, the preferred way to do it these days is to write it like this. Yeah, make this a property initializer with a fat arrow function. Right? Now with this, it will work. Because what's going on here is we use a fat arrow meaning we're getting lexical this scope. The scope of this in the class body is unambiguous. Hence, we get a bound method here. This is the best fix for it. Right? It's clean, it's terse, and it doesn't rely on terrible human memory to be done at the last second. So this will also fix that problem. Okay. So for 5 minutes, I want you to get this working on your code, and I want you to try out each of those different ways of binding to fix the problem. Also to list out the 3 ways we can fix this problem to a partner. All right, so we've gone over 3 of them. All right, everyone ready for the next step or any questions? Goody. So something that's a really common pattern is if we have state here that we want to update through some other component, right? Let's say we have an add rock component. We have all these rocks that we're listing out inside rock lists, but we also have an add rock component. The problem is that state props flow this way, and one component cannot directly change the state of another component. It can only directly change the state of its component. So the way this is going to work is we're going to pass a method from rock list down to the add method that when that method is called here, is going to trigger a set stage up here, right? And that's a super common pattern. Define a state and a method for controlling that state in a parent component, and then send that method down to a child component that will do its thing, gather the data, and then invoke that method from the parent component with the states. Okay.
I'm a little confused with that. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about is that they say the data flows in one direction, and it has to go back to.
I mean, it's a little bit of a semantic thing there, technically speaking, the data is still being changed up here, but the change is being provoked from up there. It's kind of like, let me think of a metaphor for this. What? Selfie stick? Just because they can, okay, I'll put this. Just because these components can't directly access the state of parent components doesn't mean they cannot influence the state by calling methods provided by the parents. It's like this. Imagine that you had some kids. You tell the kids what to do. They don't tell you what to do. But you give each of them a button that when that button is pushed, you've agreed that you'll kick your leg when they push that button. That button is that method, and they can push it, and then you kick your leg. But they have not forced you to click your leg. Like, they didn't walk up to you and be like, move your leg, right? You gave them a mechanism to do that, right? Or you can kind of think of it like if you have a doctor or some sort of professional you work with, you can't directly have them do what they do, but they can give you a phone number, and that's your way to interface with them to get some change, right? It's not, the idea isn't to completely lock the state down from everything else. It's to tightly control how that state can be modified. Where really the difference between two-way and one-way data binding is with two-way, these each have directly equal control of each other's states. Where with one-way data binding, this to this is direct. There is no say in the matter, but this to this is handled in a very controlled manner, is how I would break it down. Literally speaking, yes, the child is affecting the state of component, but it's only doing so through a function supplied by the parents, right? And since it's a parent function that's doing the work, it could be argued that it's the parent changing its own state.
Parent components pass values to their children, and since JavaScript functions are considered values, like this, you know what I mean?
And I'll throw some code up and slow down along the way, and hopefully that'll help illustrate it. Because this is a little bit of a weird concept. I think this is probably the hardest part to wrap your head around with React. So in here, for starters, let's say we'll create an add rock method right in here. This is bad component-based design because it's too much work for one component. But again, I often like to make too big of components and then break them out. I showed you one design philosophy, right? Where I started inside out. This time I'm going outside in. So let's say we'll have, down here I'm going to write all my update add rock stuff. In the interest of time and brevity, I'm only putting a field for the rock's name. I'm just going to hard code in the type, the hardness, and the age. And let's go through what's happening here. So what I did is on the input, I have a handle change function that whatever I'm typing in there, that's going to automatically be updating the states by calling this method. So everything we type in, it's adding to that new rock value. Then what I do is when I click the add rock button, it's going to create a new rock object partially based on that state. Then finally, it's going to call this.setState, where rocks is going to be an array containing all of the old rocks as well as the new rock. Additionally, I'm going to set new rock back to an empty string. Let me test that out. Where did I put an extra parenthesis? Oh yeah,
After the curly.
thank you.
One more up.
Oh, I forgot a parenthesis right there.
Yeah.
I think that was it. Oh yeah, then I got an extra parenthesis right there. Thank you. And frankly, part of the reason why I like to do all this live instead of pre-baked examples is so that you all can see that I get just as many bugs as you do. It's not something that you're good at and you can stop making bugs. You just learn to handle the bugs better is the difference. You never stop making bugs. Okay. Ew, I want to add some button text. That looks terrible. Yeah, whatever. There we go. And see, as I add new stuff in here, it adds new information to it throughout. I put a lot of blahs in there for the... Oh, you weren't looking at my webpage. So yeah, every time in here, when I enter in some new stuff for a rock name, hit the button, it's going to add additional entries into there that displays everything about that rock. So let me do this again. We have an input with a handle change that is just keeping that state instinct inside the component, this temporary state. Then I have a button with an on click. When I run that on click, what it's going to do is it's going to create a new rock object based off of that state I've been updating. And then finally, it's going to reset the state, adding this rock to our list of rocks, which is not only going to re-render the rock list component, but it's also going to re-render its children, giving us fourth and fifth and so on rock in this listing down here. Is what's going on. Any questions? Yes. I'll take a peek at it. All right, 5 minutes to get this working. Let me take a look at yours.
New rock.
C is supposed to be capitalized. I wasted hours on that.
Button, I wonder if it'll give a text or something.
If that's the case, that would mean that. So this handle change. Oh. This is this should be called onChange. So this is an onChange event. Oh, that's a typo on my phone too.
What happened? So like, I hit interact, type in prop name. Push button,
No.
push here.
Hey guys, slight typo on my end too.
What?
The event down here is not called handle change. It's called on change. Yeah, so every time there's a change to this element, it's going to invoke that function. Every single time there's a change. Right? Just like I did up here. Same sort of thing. I just typoed and put handle change. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that means on change.
And this on change.
That worked out.
Oh, so it's when it on.
This is the more. Yeah. You can call the method that you connected to whatever you want. It's just that the specific property has to be on change. Question up here?
So if you wanted to then it would be change the it only changes it has the name. Has the full name.
Yeah, but you could do this if you come up that way.
Just state what in a notch.
I want to help you get those thighs good for summer.
Gotta do some squats.
I like to solve before curves and turns. Just too quick.
Or Scott, if you can take one, I don't see anything obviously wrong.
They get their feet in the brackets.
Okay, so next thing is right now we have a state that has a method, we have a component that has a method that's affecting its own state, but we haven't yet discussed this pattern of, well, what if we have a child component call that? So let's make our add rock component. For educational purposes, I'm going to go ahead and make this component inside the same file, but typically you would put this into a separate file. So we will have well, for starters, for add rock, do you think that should be a functional component or a class component? Class component. Why is that? Well, we have that state that's keeping track of the rock as we're updating it. So yeah, we're going to do a class component. Because I have state that I'm managing. Specifically, the state is the new rock state. Okay, and then inside of render, going to take this stuff, put it into here. Div. Okay, and on change, I want to make a handle change method here. Actually, I can steal that from the parent component. I'm going to steal this, put it right there. And then one change I'm going to make is instead of add rock, I'm going to have handle add rock. And I'm going to call that instead right here. And what I'm going to do in handle add rock is I'm going to call this dot props dot add rock with what? This dot state dot new rock. And then I'm going to reset the state to have new rock be empty. The final thing I need to do is that I didn't actually pass down this add rock method from the parent component, nor did I even render this inside the parent component. So with all this in place, I'm going to go down to here. I'm going to render add rock and say add rock, the method, which is different from add rock, the element, is equal to this dot add rock. Which is this method right here. Let me run it to make sure everything works, and then I'll put it back up and explain things. typo I gotta fix. Yeah, here's the typo. So now rock name is being passed in here, and we're not getting that from state anymore. Okay, everything still works. Let me explain what I actually did now. Okay. So from this add rock component, which we are putting down here, we are passing in a prop that is a method of this component called add rock. And this is another part that's tricky about React is often you get things with very similar names, right? We have an add rock component, which is different from the add rock prop that's being passed. Okay. So that means that this component is going to have a this.props.add rock that's going to refer to a method up there that we'll look at in a moment. Okay. Going back up into add rock now, we see that all it has is two inputs on change that calls this.handle change, where all handle change does is it sets the new rock state to whatever the value of that input box is. Finally, we have a button with an on click that calls handle add rock. What that does is it calls up MCA and here. What that does is it comes into here and it calls the add rock prop that we passed in, and it grabs the state new rock that we set through right here. And then this part's optional just to make the UI a little bit cleaner. I reset the state to an empty string, so that way after the user hits submit, the old text value isn't hanging around. They can type something in new. Then going into this.props.addRock, where did that function come from? Yeah, it came from the parent component of this one, which is rockList, right down here. Right, we passed in this.state.newRock, which is a string. And what addRock will do with that rock name is it's going to generate a new rock. Again, we're being a little bit quick and not doing all the features. It wouldn't be hard to complete this form for you to type in every one of those, but for the interest of time, I've hard-coded these values in. Right? The only real difference from before is that now this is passed in from the child component because we no longer have state in this component that's managing that. So we set up the rock, we call this.setState. We preserve all the old rocks and add the new rock. We actually don't need this anymore either. That's stale. Is there anything else I need to get rid of? Nope. That's all. That in my addRock method, I was originally also resetting the state of new rock, but that's now done in my subcomponent.
Okay, so we can delete that, right?
Yep.
Because you did that up there in the addRock.
Yeah, because now that's being done up here, right? So we don't need to do it over there. And now we have the full data flow set up. Questions on that?
So addRock is a child just because of like the functionality. You're not extending rock as you're extending.
When I say a child, I don't necessarily mean a child in a object-oriented relationship. I mean a child as in a tree type view, right? These React elements make a tree similar to the DOM tree, so it's a child in that respect, right? It's a child node of the parent node, yes.
since it's a button, don't you have to do like stop propagation or whatever to avoid the refresh?
I do not. So this is just a regular button. If you're doing a form with a type submit button, then yes, you would, and that's an alternative way to do these. Yes.
Is it the convention when you're defining a method within a class that you're going to pass down to like a subcomponent to always start with the word handle? So like, if you're going to give it to a subcomponent to update something on the parent component state.
I wouldn't go so far to call it a convention, so much to say it's just really common. I think it's an evolving convention. React is by and large too new to have conventions, in my opinion. Yes.
And so if we were to separate this to another file, you just add a new file called adder.js, move that whole chunk over, and then
Yeah, here, and I can show you that part too real quick. So, because again, this is a real common workflow for me with React, where I'll make some big fatty component that's too much work. I'll break that component into two components on the same page, and then after I get everything all worked out and looking how I want, then I'll take that new component and extract it to a different file. So to finish that process, I'm going to create a new file called addrock.js.
in components.
Yep, in components. And I'm going to take this part, paste it down. I'm going to take the entire addrock class, delete it, paste it, export it, and then finally I need to import it back into here now that it's no longer in here. Just like that. Let me make sure I didn't typo anything. Yeah, everything still works. Now it's extracted.
So all you extracted was that class, right?
Yep, all I did was extract the class, but with the additional caveat that after I extracted that class, I'd have to re-import it back into the place I extracted it from so I can still use it.
It seems to me, I guess I don't understand the complexity of this. I don't have the bigger picture, so forgive me, but you've got handle addrock. Why is that necessary? I mean, actually, yeah, I'm just having trouble wrapping my brain around it.
For which part?
Handle addrock is just something the button uses, and addrock is a whole other. Is that handle? I didn't have time to talk. I didn't get all this down.
Okay, so for handle addrock,
There it is.
what that is doing is that's invoking our parent class for us. Something that you might see that could be even simpler sometimes is we might have done something like this. Right, just go directly to that parent method. But the reason why I didn't do it that way, the reason why I did it this way instead, was so I can set up all the state for my parent.
You need to pass it. You need to pass the parameter in.
Yeah, because addrock just handles a parameter, and I need to set that parameter up through here. One other way you could do it, it looks a little bit messier in my opinion, and also makes it hard to do the reset, is we could do something like this. If you want to get crazy with it.
I think what I'm saying is just this whole flow of data and the way the whole thing flows is just sort of foreign to me. And I'm like trying to get.
Oh yeah,
territory.
It's really different. What I recommend watching a few times, if you haven't already, is in the official React videos for this unit. There's some nice diagrams and videos that kind of draw out and explain this data flow.
The ones that are reacting to this themselves.
Yep. And this is a foreign topic. It's a little bit unconventional. I think this is one of those things where experience can almost impede a little bit just because it violates your expectations. Like personally, I learned React before I learned vanilla DOM programming. So when I saw all this stuff, I'm just like, oh yeah, why wouldn't it work that way? But you all have some preconceived notions about how things are done, right? And you have to know what's the different and what's the same. And this is quite a bit different. But I'm confident it'll stick. Another thing that I think can help is just debugging and stepping through things, right? Just really watching that flow.
Can you slide this out?
Yeah, I can slack it out. All right, any other questions before I break down? As in break down my setup, not like breakdown. That's not till the afternoon. All right, thank you.